On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Emilio Schapira. He is the VP of Engineering at ClearStreet. We're going to be talking about migrations mainly, but we're going to be talking about how you innovate and you have to migrate applications, processes, and how you have to handle that with care. There's a lot of moving parts. It has a lot of impact. And I'm super excited to have Emilio on to talk to us about this subject. Emilio, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, nice to be here.
Awesome. So before we start, let's kick it off with two things. Tell everyone what ClearStreet does, so everyone is aware. And then also, as the VP of Engineering, what are some responsibilities you have?
Sure. So ClearStreet is a prime broker. So basically, we give services for financial institutions, large investors usually. And we do clearing, settlement, custody of assets, right? And we do that. We have built that all with modern technology. Traditionally, this is done by banks with legacy technologies, right? So we're rebuilding this in the cloud, modern infrastructure. And my role as a VP of engineering is basically I have a few teams that are under my responsibility. Right now, we have about 130 engineers, so about 45 of those report to me. And this includes infrastructure, includes the clearing, settlement, and custody is a team. So it's kind of the heart of the prime broker. So that's very high level my role.
Awesome. And I guess, the theme of the podcast is we're talking about, innovation and migration, the key component there being with care, because obviously, especially in the financial industry, things can't afford to be broken. And moving things is complicated and complex. But let's just maybe start off at the top and talk about migrations and maybe just some of the challenges that someone can run into before we dive too deep.
Yeah, sounds good. And before getting there, actually, I also want to mention that, migrations themselves, it sounds like a boring project, right? But the reality is that, if we're going to keep innovating and keep our technology fresh, usually what you do that is building new services that replace older services, right? So, there's all the excitement about getting the technology up to speed, but you have to do it carefully. And the reason I like this topic is because it brings in a lot of the best software engineering practices, life cycle, and things like that. So that's what I wanted to walk a little bit through in this podcast, right? The experience that we have at ClearStreet, what we have learned, what are some of our best practices, right? So,
absolutely. I guess you bring up a good point. The innovation piece. And before we dive into migrations, I've been asking leaders this question. I'm going to ask you because at some point, innovation means trying something new, a calculated risk. It could mean a lot of things for different companies. What innovation means, I guess, at the pace at which technology is consistently changing. There's a pressure of, do you make a change? Do you adjust? Do you stick to what you're doing? I call it technology FOMO, because if you wait too long, if you go too early, there's all these implications. It seems a lot of art with a calculated decision matrix behind it. I guess before we dive into migrations itself, when you look at trends and emerging technologies, how do you evaluate where you take advantage of that, so that obviously you do want to innovate?
Yeah, and that usually comes, in technology in particular, the best innovations often come to solve real pains that we have, right? And often as engineers, it's like, we're not just looking for the coolest technology that is out there and see how I can apply it to what I'm doing. Usually, we're all feeling, right, that we have the need, that what we're doing, this can be done better, right? And that often is what takes you into a search for how could we do this better, and look at new technologies that come. Sometimes you do hear about something that was not necessarily in your mind, but you very quickly map it to the problems that you have and how that's going to help you. And I think, that's how we bring most of the technologies. Usually there has to be either a pain or bring big value, right? And that's what's going to make it worth, actually, to go through this process of finally adopting it. Migrating what you need to migrate and all that.
Absolutely. I guess if you're going to fast forward and go through the innovation process and the development process, and here you go, you have the application, you start planning for migration. Obviously, there's implications. There's lots of dependencies, testing, data quality. When you're looking at a migration and you're looking at some of those top level challenges, what are some of the main ones that you have to keep your eye on?
Yeah, I mean, especially in our domain, I would say this generalizes a lot, but in the finance domain, as you said correctly, like we were, I mean, managing a lot of transactions. To give you an idea, I mean, we process around 2% of the daily notional value in US equity volume, right? So that's, I mean, it could be over 15 billion of dollars in a single day that we're processing. So we have to be careful with how we do things. So then, yeah, we have in place a more strict process in how we are going to introduce new services, right? And one case that I'm going to be referencing through this podcast is one where we did the core bookkeeping of Clear Street. I mean, basically, our clearing, settlement, and custody services have the books and record in a collection of services, right? And we changed from something that was more monolithic to again, a collection of microservices, right? So we had to be very careful as we were doing that. Of course, not all migrations are that big, even for smaller things that we're continuously doing. You need to be careful. And yeah, I mean, part of the strategies that have helped us a lot is one is to have a really strong testing framework, right? I mean, there's all sorts of operations that the system needs to do, and we need to be able to verify and make sure that they're working properly, right? So obviously, we're all familiar with unit testing, with integration testing, there's end-to-end testing. So we need to invest in that. One thing that we have been doing that has been super helpful for us is what the domain of behavior-driven development or behavior testing. And what that is basically it's end-to-end or integration test. But what's nice about it is that the way you define your problems is in human language, right? So you write it, you use Markdown to put tables. Like if I have this, I mean, stocks at this price and I apply this transaction, I should get this ledger entry as an output, right? And that's because that's human readable. That's something we can work directly with the business on, I mean, writing it, reviewing it, validating it, right? So that has been super helpful, and that, I mean, validates the consistency. And in particular, just, I mean, for listeners to know, we're using Cucumber. You use the Gherkin language, that is this human readable language, right? And that has been one of the key components we have been using to make sure that, I mean, both the old system and the new system have the expected behavior. And again, that actually enables us to much more confidently make changes into the systems.
Awesome. And where do you guys, I mean, I think the explanation was fantastic from a technical perspective. And where do you guys keep the documentation? Because I'm starting to ask now, like, where's that kept? How do people actually ramp up on testing methodology? Because every company, while they use similar tools, it's a little bit different everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the tests themselves and all that are written in our source code repository, right? So it's Git. And yeah, I mean, as I said, it's Markdown, so you can release into your files. We use Notion in the company as our kind of wiki. So a lot of the guidelines and things, project management, we do there. And that's where we keep the documentation.
And I guess, like, you mentioned this example of this bookkeeping component. I mean, it seems like it's a critical function as you're kind of going through and thinking about your company, Clear Street, versus, let's say, comparing it to a larger bank that maybe people are more aware of, like the complexity. $15 billion a day seems very complex of what you guys are doing. So I think people will look you guys up and figure out that there's a lot of complexity. But when you look at that sheer dollar volume as it increases at a larger bank compared to you, is there much difference really? Like, because 15 billion or 50 billion or 150, I mean, there's no room for error. People are going to be upset if dollars are missing. Is there any difference? Is there similarity? Where's there overlap? Is the strategy the same? Just kind of curious.
To give you an idea, recently we were working on introducing a new asset type to our systems. And this is something that, I mean, a normal big bank would take years, right, to introduce. And we were able to do it, I mean, in a matter of months, right? So again, these are tools that and practices that really help us move a lot faster.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're kind of making that analogy. I was thinking about I think recently the CEO of Ford was on an interview, and he talked about how they have, I think, 150 different suppliers, and they all have their own operating system for each component of the electrical pieces of a car. And he said they can't even edit some of them, adjust the code base because it's IP, copyright protection. And if they do, they don't even understand what it is. And they're recently trying to move towards what Tesla's done in terms of having a better vertical integration of those components and write it from scratch. And he said it's such a challenge and such a mindset shift to move from we insource all those parts in the software to now we develop them. And I think when you were talking about the banks and obviously the mainframe piece of it, the legacy tech, and I'm thinking about what you guys do, and I'm like, it's got to be a much more efficient process since it's probably all vertically integrated, and testing itself. When you go to migration, there are very clearly defined infrastructures that have built for this purpose versus what you alluded to, and that seems like it's a massive advantage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. I guess when you're kind of looking at, some of the issues that you see, right? So, we're talking about data quality, you talk about testing, automation, and you mentioned early on, like you guys have you talked about the framework. On the data quality side, I mean, what do you put in place to ensure that when a migration does happen from an older solution to a newer solution that you guys are updating, innovating, how do you ensure data quality stays intact?
Yeah, regarding data quality, that brings a couple of points I wanted to talk about. And basically, when you're bringing a new service, you're often replacing a service that was already existing, right? And that service has inputs and outputs. In our case, our services are, most of them are event-driven. We use a lot Kafka as our message bus. So what you often do is run the two services in parallel, especially when you're getting closer to releasing, you run it in production even. And that gives you an opportunity to compare the output of these two separate systems, right? And you can use, either compare the output that is written into databases, or you can compare maybe the output is another stream. So you can actually take those streams and compare them. Often the models are different, so that comparison is not as trivial as row-to-row kind of or message-to-message comparison. But this is a very good strategy. And what we do, for example, if we're doing a PubSub system, we might have actually two consumers of the same Kafka topic doing the execution, and then we can look at the output of both and make that comparison. Another case is if you have an API, right? So you can have an API, and usually it calls one of the services. When we're going to release a migration, often what we do is put a facade in front of the API. So you have the same API, and then you're going to have the old and the new service, and it's going to call both in parallel, right? But one is going to be, in both cases, right? Either subscribers or facade. One is going to be the primary, and the other one is going to be the secondary. And then, that's giving you a lot of opportunities to look for, data quality. We started using a product called Metaplane, actually, that is also helping us to set up alarms. For example, if there's some anomalies in the data and the historical data and things like that. And then finally, when you're ready, you're going to do the opposite, right? So what we do is now the old system is going to be secondary, the new system is going to be primary, but even then you want to keep them running, right? Because at the end of the day, again, every single message, every single transaction has to be correct, right? So we want to make sure, and often, obviously, the issues can be with one particular asset type or one particular request that, went through a corporate action that is not regular, and that's where you can catch issues, right? So that's what combines both the data quality and also this sort of primary versus secondary migration stages.
Awesome. Interesting. I think it seems like everything you've been talking about, there needs to be a lot of dominoes in place before you would flip over the cut over the system, because we're going down to a single transaction, and the dollar volume could be impactful. I guess I was just had something pop into my mind, because obviously I know you've been at Clear Street for a little bit of time, but you didn't come from fintech or the banking industry. How much time did it take for you to ramp up on all the nomenclature and all the actual terminology and the concepts around the systems?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been at Clear Street now a year and a half. Yeah, in the past, I was working more on the cloud platform. I worked at Google for a long time, for like 12 years. So yeah, this is definitely a new field for me. And the great thing is that there are many resources. First of all, the people here, we're combining basically the technology and the know-how of the industry with people that have been for decades in the industry, right? So for example, the clearing, settlement, and custody team, it's me and Mohammed Arshad. He has been building systems for clearing since the 80s, right? So we complement each other great, right? He's more of the subject matter expert for the business. But yeah, I'm learning every day. It's like fascinating how deep the field is. And one of the things also that has helped is a Clear Street. We have FINRA certifications, right? And those usually, for the people that are trading or in operations, those are required, not necessarily for engineers, but that said, Clear Street encourages, right, all engineers to also take the exams, get the certifications. That has been also super helpful. And actually, there's pretty amazing training programs that are available. So that has been another great result. But I tell you, the field is deep. One thing that I learned is that, yeah, you could be like decades on the field and talk to someone and you think they're going to know everything. But because it's so deep, people end up specializing in very deep domains, right? Asset management, maybe the fixed income, maybe derivatives. Everything is the universe. So yeah, it's been amazing to discover.
Awesome, man. Awesome. I certainly, it's definitely a field I can imagine you could spend a lifetime and still not learn everything, and the evolution of everything is so fast as well. I appreciate you being on and kind of talking to us about some of the challenges in migrations, especially within the fintech space. And before I let you go, I was gonna ask you. I asked all my guests this question, but I was gonna ask you as well. If you could have a future guest on the show cover a topic you'd like to learn more about, what would you like that to be?
I think again, like in this domain, a lot of the problems with data and data management and that handoff between what is the warehouse and the transactional systems is very interesting. So maybe, yeah, hearing more about it. Maybe, one thing that I'm very curious about is the vision of a data warehouse where the data is more in motion, right? So it's not just tables. It could be also streaming topics and things like that. So it could be an interesting topic to talk about.
Okay. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you regarding anything you've mentioned on the show, what's a good way of touching base with you?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is probably the best. So obviously my name is you're going to put a link.
Yeah, we'll make sure. Yeah, we'll have some links in there for you. So we'll make sure people are directed to your LinkedIn to contact you. Emilio, thanks for being on. Thanks for sharing. I really do appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. That's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, if you did find the episode useful, please share it with somebody that might. That's how we've been growing. And like, subscribe, share, leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode. I appreciate that. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.